For 3 years she had sat quietly in the back row of the church, always arriving before the service began, and never leaving until the last hymn had ended. To the casual eye, she was just another member of the congregation, a woman of discipline and devotion, who respected her faith enough to appear every week. But her silence was not born of spirituality. It was the silence of someone hiding a storm inside. From her corner seat, she had the perfect view of the man who had captured her thoughts and held them hostage. Every word he spoke seemed carved into her. Every gesture burned itself into her memory. She told herself it was admiration at first, the natural respect for a leader of faith, yet even she knew she had crossed into dangerous territory long ago. She kept a small notebook inside her handbag, never showing it to anyone. The pages were filled with notes that no sermon could justify. What color suit he wore, whether he smiled before or after prayer, the way he adjusted his glasses when reading a verse, even how long he lingered on certain passages. These small details seemed meaningless to anyone else, but to her they were pieces of a private world, one in which she and the pastor existed together, in ways no one else could imagine. The congregation only saw a quiet woman in the back row, but in her mind she was already living a secret life with him, one she guarded as closely as a treasure. The obsession was not loud or obvious, it was patient. She became skilled at waiting, at feeding herself on glimpses and scraps of moments. If he looked up and his eyes briefly swept across the pews, she convinced herself he was looking only at her. If his voice deepened during a sermon, she imagined it was meant for her ears alone. These small fantasies grew roots, and before long they formed a garden of illusions she could not escape. She found excuses to pass by the church on weekdays, lingering outside as if the building itself carried his presence. She memorized the shape of his car, the sound of his footsteps, and even the rhythm of his breathing when he paused mid-sentence during long services. Her friends noticed changes in her. She was distracted in conversation, often gazing off as though replaying something in her mind. They assumed she was simply more dedicated to her faith, that she had found comfort in her pastor's words. No one suspected the truth. No one knew that she spent evenings writing letters she would never send, addressing him as if he were already hers. Some nights she stayed awake imagining the day he would finally notice her devotion, finally choose her above all others. The idea gave her strength, but it also trapped her in a loop of expectation that stretched from days to weeks, and from weeks to years. 3 years is a long time to wait for something unspoken, yet she endured it with determination. Her patience was not a passive state, but a constant rehearsal, as if her life was a performance leading toward an unseen finale. She did not see herself as a stalker or a danger. In her mind, she was faithful, waiting for what she believed was destined. Every time she saw him shake hands with another member of the congregation, she felt a tightening in her chest. But she told herself to be calm. The day would come when she would no longer sit in the shadows, when her patience would be rewarded, and when all her silent observations would finally have meaning. But waiting for so long twisted something inside her. The longer she sat in that back row, the stronger her certainty grew that what she felt was not only real but justified. She convinced herself that devotion was proof of destiny, that sacrifice was proof of love. 3 years of quiet longing had prepared her for something dangerous, though she did not yet realize it. What had begun as admiration had already darkened into possession, and with every passing Sunday, the line between faith and obsession faded, until it was no longer visible at all. The pastor's life had always been surrounded by whispers. He was respected in public, admired for his sermons, and the way he carried himself with calm authority. Yet in private conversations people spoke of him differently. The women of the congregation were the first to notice details others ignored. Their laughter in hushed tones hinted at secrets, and she learned to listen without drawing attention. Sitting close enough to overhear, she collected every fragment of rumor, like pieces of a puzzle that only she cared to solve. Some spoke of his private charm, of the strange effect he had on women who sought his guidance. Of the reasons, some never missed a prayer meeting, despite being casual about faith before. She heard them say that there was something unusual about him, something beyond his gentle words and polished smile, something that pulled women into his orbit and refused to let them go. At first she dismissed the gossip as envy. After all, people often envied those in positions of power. But the more she heard, the harder it became to ignore. The details were too specific, too consistent. What began as vague speculation soon turned into certainty in her mind. The women hinted about a secret he carried, something physical, something that made them look at him differently. For her, that single idea became impossible to forget. She found herself imagining it in the quiet of her room, replaying those whispered words over and over, until they became louder than the sermons she heard on Sundays. Her devotion began to take a new shape. She no longer waited in the pews, simply to be close to his voice. Now she studied his movements with sharper focus, as if the truth about him could be revealed in the smallest gesture. If he lingered in conversation with another woman, her thoughts turned bitter, wondering if they had discovered what she longed to confirm. If he seemed distracted, she told herself it was because someone else had claimed the secret she craved. Each rumor planted seeds of jealousy in her, and soon her patience became poisoned with restlessness. She started staying longer after services, pretending to tidy him books or offer help with small tasks. Every extra second near him felt like a test, a chance to see if the rumors carried weight. She watched the way women touched his arm lightly when speaking to him, the way they laughed too easily at his words, the way their eyes lingered when they thought no one noticed. These signs convinced her more than the gossip ever could. She was certain now that there was a hidden side to him, a side that only a few had known, and she burned with the desire to join that circle. What she did not realize was how deep her obsession had sunk. The whispers were not facts, but in her mind they became undeniable truths. They filled her with longing and also with fear. Fear that she would never be chosen, fear that someone else already held what she believed should belong to her alone. The mixture of hunger and fear grew unbearable, and she began to fantasize about moments that had not yet happened. She imagined walking into his office and closing the door, imagined him lowering his voice just for her, imagined secrets spilling into her hands. The fantasies were detailed, vivid, and relentless. Nights became the hardest to endure. She would lie awake replaying every look, every word, every rumor, trying to piece together a story that proved she was destined to be the one who uncovered the truth about him. The thought that other women might already know what she did not know drove her into fits of envy she could not control. Each day she returned to church, she did so with more determination, telling herself that patience had its limits. She had waited long enough. The whispers had planted a fire inside her that would not be satisfied by sermons or prayers. She needed proof, and once she had it, she told herself everything would finally make sense. It was never supposed to happen that night, at least not in the way it unfolded. The prayer gathering had ended, and most of the congregation had already left. Candles still burned low at the altar, casting long shadows across the empty hall. She lingered as she often did, pretending to arrange hymn books, her eyes fixed on him as he collected his notes. The silence of the nearly deserted church wrapped around her like a veil, and she felt a strange sense of inevitability, as if 3 years of waiting had brought her to this exact moment. He didn't notice her at first, not until she stepped closer, her hands trembling slightly though her face showed nothing. The air between them felt heavier than usual, and though he spoke of closing the building soon, she hardly registered his words. Her focus was on the closeness, the opportunity, the door that had suddenly opened. She had imagined this scene countless times in her mind, rehearsed it until it felt more real than her own life. But fantasy is never the same as reality, and when she found herself standing inches away from him, something inside her snapped free from restraint. What happened next blurred into instinct rather than conscious choice. The encounter was swift, forbidden, and nothing like the holy space that surrounded them. The whispers she had gathered for years proved true in ways that overwhelmed her senses. What had once been rumor became undeniable fact, and for a fleeting moment she felt the victory of her patience. She had uncovered what she had sought for so long, and yet, instead of satisfaction, a strange unease wrapped itself around her heart. The reality was bigger than the fantasy, and instead of calming the storm inside her, it fed it until she felt more restless than ever. Walking home afterward, she was unable to steady her thoughts. She expected relief, maybe even peace, but instead she felt consumed by a hunger that gnawed at her. She could not stop replaying the details in her head, each memory sharp and burning. What she had wanted for years had finally been hers. But she could not escape the thought that it might not remain hers alone. The whispers of other women now echoed louder in her mind, tormenting her with the idea that she was not special, not chosen, just another name in a hidden list. That thought poisoned her more deeply than waiting ever had. The following days became unbearable. Every glance she saw him give others in the congregation felt like a betrayal. Every handshake or warm smile seemed to mock her, convincing her that he had shared the same secret with them too. Instead of feeling closer to him, she felt surrounded by invisible rivals. Jealousy took root in her and twisted every moment of his presence into a torment. She wanted to confront him, to demand acknowledgement, but she feared rejection more than anything. And so she swallowed her words, letting them rot inside, until they transformed into darker thoughts. She began writing in her notebook again, but the entries changed. No longer did she record his ties or his choice of verses. Now she wrote about her fears, her anger, her determination to claim what she believed was hers. The notebook became a journal of obsession, each page filled with the kind of declarations she would never dare to speak aloud. Her handwriting grew harsher, the lines pressed so hard into the paper that some pages tore. She convinced herself that this was no longer about love or admiration. It was about control, about possession, about making sure no one else could ever take from her what she had waited 3 years to claim. She started to dream at night, dreams where she was the only one left standing by his side, dreams where no rivals existed, dreams that ended with a silence so final it frightened her when she woke. She told herself these were only dreams, but deep down she knew they were beginning to shape her reality. The encounter had not satisfied her. It had changed her. It had awakened something she could not put back to sleep, something that demanded more than just stolen moments. Her desire had shifted into obsession, and her obsession was slowly turning into something much darker, something that whispered of endings rather than beginnings. The night was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes every small sound feel amplified. She had waited for this moment for years, rehearsed it in her mind so many times that the image of him lying there, unaware, seemed almost inevitable. The house was dark except for the faint glow of a streetlight filtering through the curtains. Every shadow became a guide, every creak of the floorboards a signal that her plan was unfolding exactly as she had imagined. Her heartbeat was steady, though the anticipation burned through her veins like fire. This was not a random act. This was the culmination of 3 years of waiting, watching, and yearning, and she had convinced herself that it was the only way to make the obsession complete. She moved carefully through the house, each step measured, each movement deliberate. She knew the rhythm of his breathing, the rise and fall of his chest in sleep, and it became the signal she had been waiting for. Her hand gripped the pillow, the ordinary household item, now transformed into an instrument of finality. She pressed it over his face, feeling the soft give of the fabric against his skin. His body twitched beneath her weight, a brief struggle that only confirmed to her the reality of what she was doing. The longer she held, the more her own excitement and fear merged, and the world outside the bedroom ceased to exist. At first, the struggle startled her. It was not as controlled as she had imagined. He moved beneath her hands, attempting to fight the weight, and for a fleeting second she considered stopping. But the thought of waiting another second, of letting this moment slip, was unbearable. She pressed harder, adjusting the pillow until the muffled resistance faded into stillness. She stared down at him, astonished at the reality of what she had achieved. The years of planning, the obsessive notes, the fantasies that had consumed her nights, all of it had led to this quiet, terrifying moment. She felt no remorse, only a strange sense of completion, as though the act itself justified every second of her obsessive wait. Afterwards, she remained where she was, staring at the motionless body. The room smelled faintly of her own fear, and her heart pounded in a rhythm that was both exhilarating and horrifying. For a long while, she did not move, did not breathe fully, as if to disturb the perfection of the moment would undo everything. The world had contracted into the space between her and him, and in that silence, she realized that her obsession had finally taken shape in a way she could never reverse. She thought of the 3 years she had spent waiting, imagining this exact night, and a chilling satisfaction settled over her. She left the house with the calm of someone who had completed a task long overdue. Outside, the night was still, the quiet now welcoming instead of oppressive. She walked slowly, retracing her steps, as if testing to make sure no trace of her presence had been left behind. Each shadow, each familiar landmark, became part of a carefully rehearsed choreography she had carried in her mind for months. The act had been final, yet in her mind, the obsession did not end. It had transformed into something larger, something darker. The sense of possession she had felt during those years of waiting now extended beyond imagination, into the realm of irreversible action. When the morning came, the news spread like a shockwave through the community. The pastor had died suddenly in his sleep. The congregation mourned, shocked and confused, struggling to understand how a man so admired could meet such an end. She attended the services quietly, blending in as always, carrying the secret that only she knew. No one suspected the truth, not yet. She had become a ghost in plain sight, a shadow lurking behind mourning eyes. Her plan had worked, but the consequences of obsession were only beginning to reveal themselves. The act had not brought peace, only a heavier, more complicated reality. She had crossed a line, and nothing could bring her back. The news of the pastor's death hit the congregation like a thunderclap. People whispered in corners, eyes wide with disbelief, trying to make sense of what had happened. The man they had trusted, admired, and looked up to was gone, taken in a way no one could have imagined. Initially, the cause seemed natural, a tragic passing in his sleep, and most accepted it with heavy hearts. But as investigators delved deeper, cracks began to appear in the story, small inconsistencies that no one could ignore. The community's shock gradually shifted into suspicion, and soon, the quiet admiration that had surrounded the pastor turned into fear. The truth emerged slowly, and when it did, it shattered the fragile calm of the town. She confessed, but not with tears or regret. She confessed with a chilling calm, as though stating facts instead of crimes. She explained, matter-of-factly, that she had loved him too much to allow anyone else to claim him. That waiting 3 years had solidified a claim she felt no one else could challenge. The investigators were stunned by the detail of her obsession, by the meticulous notes and records she had kept for years, each page a testament to her relentless patience. They found her journal filled with years of observation, thoughts, and fantasies, all carefully catalogued, all pointing to the inevitability of what had happened. People in the congregation could not believe that someone so quiet, so devoted, could harbor such dangerous thoughts. Her calm demeanor only intensified the horror. There was no dramatic confrontation, no sudden confession in public. The revelation came in measured tones, as if she were merely stating a fact that everyone should have known all along. The investigators had to piece together the puzzle of her obsession, realizing that what had seemed like admiration had always been something much darker. Every small detail she had recorded over the years was now evidence of premeditation, of a mind that had been steadily building toward this fatal act. As the story spread, fear rippled through the community. People began to question everything they had once taken for granted. How many others had noticed her presence in the back row of the church, her quiet, unwavering attention, and had never thought to suspect danger? The whispers of her obsession grew louder, fueled by the shock that someone could so carefully plan a crime over years without detection. Her obsession had been invisible, hiding in plain sight. And that realization unsettled everyone who had known her as the quiet, faithful woman who had always attended the services without fail. Then came the twist that no one expected. During the investigation, authorities discovered that the pastor had not been her only target. Her obsessive behavior extended beyond him. In her notebook were sketches, observations, and notes about other members of the congregation. Hints that she had already begun focusing on someone else, another man who had caught her eye. The community's fear intensified, as it became clear that her actions were not a singular moment of madness, but the beginning of a pattern. The obsession that had driven her to murder was not satisfied with one victim. It was a force that could continue, silently lurking among them, watching, waiting. The pastor's death became more than a tragic story. It became a warning. It was a story of obsession, patience, and the dangerous transformation of admiration into possession. People who had once considered the church a safe, sacred space now looked around with suspicion. The revelation that the quietest, most devoted observer could harbor such darkness changed everything. The community struggled to reconcile their memories of her with the horrifying reality, and the lingering question remained: who might be next? The fear and fascination that followed would leave a mark long after the funeral candles burned out, a chilling reminder that obsession, when left unchecked, can grow into something deadly and irreversible.